Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. We are back, and everything you see is for sale. When available, prices are in the description below. All names and references also in the description. Questions about buying? Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com with your pricing questions. I'm also looking to build inventory. Sell me one watch or an entire collection. I also take trades. If you wish to reach out for a sale, a trade, or a purchase, email me. tmosso at thewatchbox.com. All right, let's jump straight in. I have to say, you're going to see incredible things on today's show, and I do mean truly extraordinary watches. But the Rolex Datejust is, if anything, the underappreciated core collection member of the Rolex catalog amidst the GMTs, the Daytonas, the Submariners, and this year at least, even the Oyster Perpetuals. It's easy to lose track of just how important this foundational watch is. First launched in 1945, the 40th anniversary of the Rolex company, the Datejust was instantly a symbol of Rolex ingenuity, combining Rolex's innovations in water resistance, the perpetual automatic winding system with the Oyster case, and a date that was always just. That is to say, the date would jump instantaneously at midnight. 36 millimeters then, 36 millimeters now. It remains an evergreen option for those who want to watch somewhere between a sports watch and a dress watch. Now, this is 116234, white gold bezel with a 904L stainless steel case, bracelet, and clasp. You can see it wears beautifully on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. Not every Datejust is a sporty Datejust, but this one is. With the combination of a bright blue dial with loomed stick indices, it is visible at night, full Oyster bracelet, sportier than the Jubilee model, and of course, all in steel rather than precious metal composition. This one wears well and durably. 100-meter water resistance, robustly anti-magnetic, and shock resistant. It's also a certified chronometer, which means it is a very accurate watch. You have that 3-link Oyster bracelet we associate with the GMTs, the Daytonas, the Subs, and the Sea Dwellers. Solid as Rolex cases tend to be on the reverse side. You can see there's an Oyster clasp, and inside a 5mm Easy Link quick adjustment system. There are also 3 drilled divots inside the clasp that you can use to re-anchor the bracelet inside the clasp body. So 3 ways to size if you include the removable links. Let's do a quick loom shot here. And you can see for a watch that is not overtly sporting, it's a subtle sports watch, just as it's a subtle dress watch. It is quite well loomed. This is a unisex option. It's suitable for any wrist size and any taste. It is a timeless watch that has already stood the test of time. And if you buy this watch today, you're buying something that represents real value, as the Datejust, despite being one of the all-time Rolex models, is not hyped to kingdom come, and prices remain, well, just. Now, if you want to talk about a watch for which prices are a bit more exuberant, we have the Patek Philippe Nautilus. This is the 5711 1A010. So 40 millimeters and only about 8.4 millimeters thick as I measure this one. This is a beautiful piece. There is a tremendous amount of social media hype and angst surrounding this watch. What has not changed, regardless of era, is that it is a beautifully proportioned design. Now, it wears bigger than its rated size. It's technically a 40, but from side to side across the winglets, it's a bit more than 42 across the wrist. All in stainless steel. It's well-loomed, automatic winding, and 120 meters water resistant, which makes its super slim profile particularly impressive. As you can see, it is a watch that you could wear with formal attire, as it slides easily underneath a dress cuff. We zoom out a little bit, and it's easy to see that proportionally it looks great. It is broad, and it does read as larger than 40, so if you've got a bigger wrist, don't worry about the rated size. This watch is fine even on a tree trunk forearm. Lots to love on the reverse side. You can see this one has the caliber 324, and as you'll note, it is Patek Philippe seal era, caliber 324. We've got a free sprung balance beaten away at 8 beats per second. We've got 6-position adjustment and an anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. Finishing is superb, 45-hour power reserve with a quick set, and with a combination of free sprung architecture, 6-position adjustment, the silicone hairspring, and the Patek Philippe seal, this watch is guaranteed from the factory to run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day. All in stainless steel. You can see how extravagantly hand-finished it is, with small details like the rolled bevel on the edge of the case continuing seamlessly along the shoulders of the links, and the multi-part case, far more complex and more difficult to finish relative to what you get on an Aquanaut. You can see that part of the price delta is the simple complexity factor, and that's a bit of a contradiction in terms, the simple complexity, but it really is that. It's straightforward when you look at it, that it is a far more involved finishing assignment and assembly assignment than an Aquanaut. Let's do a quick loom shot. You can see a lovely gradient blue dial, silver blue at the center, almost navy blue black at the edge with white gold hands, as well as indices. One of the features I always discuss when talking about the evolution from Gerald Genta's Royal Oak to the Nautilus, I actually think the Nautilus is a bit more fully realized. If you can see, there is that octagonal form to the Royal Oak bezel, but then the crystal and the dial are round, whereas on the Nautilus, the dial, the crystal, and the inner bezel actually trace the same geometries. You have that same polygonal form, so from the outside in, it is consistent and symmetrical. Let's do a quick loom shot with both the Royal Oak and the Nautilus here. As you can see, both of them are pretty well loomed, but the Nautilus does have more of it. So while the Royal Oak is still quite legible, the Nautilus indices have bigger plots of loom, and that goes for the hands as well. Now, I've got to say these watches play to very different crowds because a full gold Royal Oak is a timepiece designed to be seen, and not seen at close range and admired enviously like with a Nautilus and steel. No, this is a watch that's designed to be seen from the other side of the pool at the cabana area of the Delano on Miami Beach. This is a very tropical watch, or at least in the case of Miami, subtropical. 41 millimeters in rose gold. This is the 15400 OR, a timepiece that is quite exuberant. Silver dial, Grande Tapisserie. It is cut on a pantograph. The Royal Oak Offshores use a stamped dial. It's a mega tapisserie. Here we have the hobnail in large but not mega size, which means it's still cut the old-fashioned way on a mimicry lathe. Now the watch is thin. In spite of being broad, there's not a whole lot of difference in size on the wrist. If you're talking about lug to lug and physical footprint, from the 42 Royal Oak Offshore to the 41 Royal Oak, the real difference between these isn't going to be the surface area they occupy, but the thickness of them. And that's really where the 15400 pulls ahead. There's an elegance here that you don't get in the brutal Royal Oak Offshore. You get the same degree of finishing you expect on any Royal Oak, though with a bracelet that takes 9 to 11 hours to finish in its entirety. You get the same level of attention to detail and exhaustive finishing on the case and the bezel. You can see different levels of polish, creases. The curves and the creases in, as you can see, medley right here. We'll get as close as we can. Curves outboard, as we have a rounded octagon inspired by a vintage diving helmet. That was the inspiration behind the original 5402 Jumbo from 1972, Gerald Genta's original Royal Oak watch. And you can see you still have that rounded octagon with white gold hexagonal bolts in the bezel. They are white gold, and they are bolts. That's how they can align all the way around. Rose gold hands, indices, and logo, screw-down crown. Though both the Jumbo and the standard Royal Oak automatic here are 50 meters rated. The fact is the Royal Oak automatic, whether the 15, 300, 400, or 500, with its screw-down crown, it really is surface swimmable, whereas the push-down crown 50-meter Jumbo is not. Caliber 3120, 60-hour power reserve, robust architecture, 21.6 beat rate. It's got a hacking seconds and quick set date. And as you can see, it's braced against shock with a Gyromax style free sprung balance and a full Batwing style balance bridge. So it's a very tough movement designed to drive the Royal Oak Offshore, so it wears very well as a sports watch movement. Now this watch, of course, in gold, it's not something you're going to want to take and use as a beater, but the watch is very wearable, low enough that it's not as likely to come into contact with hard surfaces as the taller Offshore. It's a watch that would wear well on a really big wrist, and as you can see on my wrist, 16 centimeters, it's not quite out to the edge, but I wouldn't recommend wearing this watch on a wrist smaller than 15 centimeters in circumference. That said, it is nice and low cropped, and it slides real easy underneath the dress cuff. The combination of the ice-cold silver dial and the warm red gold of the case is a particularly endearing feature of this particular 15400 OR. Now, we spoke of the Royal Oak Offshore, and we may as well speak of it in detail. This model, launched for 2018, is often described as the Ghost, as it's a combination of grayscale metals and materials, starting with a lovely two-tone diver-style strap. This is something AP rarely does, as you have a gray insert on the top molded onto a black base, so it's got a lovely two-tone transition. The case is made of titanium, grade 5, lighter than steel and more scratch resistant. And then we have ceramic pushers for the chronograph, a ceramic collar for the crown, and a ceramic bezel to help protect this watch from scrapes and scuffs. The original Royal Oak Offshore, designed as a 20th anniversary tribute to the original Royal Oak, was a design by Emmanuel Guet. Gerald Genta did the original Royal Oak. Emmanuel Guet, then in his early 20s, designed the Offshore, and it's everything the name implies. It is a bigger, more insistent, more extreme take on the classic design, but with the same degree of fine finishing, especially as you can see the ceramic has been finished with the same polished sheer and satin finished top that you would get on gold or titanium or steel. So you're not giving up any of that hand finishing, and you can see the detailing here is even the shoulders of the crown side have been micro beveled. This is a gorgeous watch that uses the same base movement that we saw just a moment ago on the Royal Oak automatic, and you can see it's called here the 3126 because it's the 3120 that's been designed to mate to a Dubois de Praz 3840 vertical clutch module chronograph. It sits on top of the base movement. The base movement here has a 50 to 55 hour power reserve because it is driving a complication. This is a vertical clutch system, so it has a very smooth engagement to the chronograph. You've got hacking seconds, a quick set date, and critically with the screw down crown, 100 meter water resistance. So if you want a watch to wear without a care, between the durability of the rubber, the grade 5 tie, and the ceramic, this is going to be your Royal Oak. So let's do a quick loom shot here. And you can see the Nautilus might ace the standard Royal Oak in loom, but it can't step to the Royal Oak Offshore, not in the dark. That said, I've got one that beats all, so I'm going to start with a loom shot and see if you guys can guess. Can you guess? Do you already know? Oh my gosh, that bezel detent. A little piece of heaven. I think you guys have already called this one, but if you called the variant, for the first time on WatchBox Reviews, we have a 2018 Basel World release. This is the Blancpain 50 Fathoms Grande Date. Still 45 millimeters, but now in a lovely and subtle matte titanium. It features a big date on the dial. It uses the same beloved cambered sapphire crystal over the bezel, so the whole bezel can be loomed as you just saw. The sapphire along with a box section sapphire over the dial, making this watch robustly scratch resistant because it's got all of the sapphire scratch resistant heat shield up here. Still 300 meters water resistant, sailcloth strap, textile on the top, rubber on the bottom, and as you can see the movement is based on the 1315. This one of course with the big date complication. Still a 5-day power reserve, still beautifully hand finished with the highlight being this mile wide mirrored anglage across the bridges. I also like the subtlety of the finishing chosen. You can see that they have a lovely sort of spiral grain across, sort of linear brushing that arcs from the center to the edge, and it's a little bit more contemporary than the somewhat hackneyed Côte de Genève featured on every other movement by every other brand. You can see caliber 6918B. It is basically the shock-resistant anti-magnetic 5-day power reserve 1315. And though the watch is big, make no mistake, beautifully finished inside and out, it sits just as handsome on the wrist. This is a watch that I would wear happily because in titanium it's feather light and it's only about 50.5 millimeters across the wrist, and you can see the further my arm gets from the lens, the better it looks proportionally, and it really does suit a wrist as small as 16 centimeters circumference. I would say 15. You could probably even take the chance. In spite of the size of the watch, it's not heavy and it's not broad from lug to lug. Let's talk about micro rotor automatics, starting with one that is new for 2021. This is something I can get for you if you want it. Made in 10 pieces. It is the Speakmarin 1 and 2 open-worked dual time mint. 38 millimeters or 42 millimeters, they make both. The former is a 10-piece limited edition. That's what you see right here. They're making 18 pieces and 42 millimeters. These watches are made in Neuchâtel, a brand inspired by the watchmaker of the same name. It's a very Swiss-English hybrid, and there's a lot going on here. As you can see, the case in blackened titanium is feather light, scratch resistant with a DLC over a very hard grade 5 tie base. It's a 52-hour automatic winding power reserve by virtue of a micro rotor that's visible on both sides. This is the SMA02 movement. It features a radial date, as you can, or excuse me, it has a retrograde date with a radial second time zone, as you can see, and you actually set that second time zone using a pusher. Easy to set your local time. You set the reference time and then you set your local time. And as you can see, it is a beautiful open-worked, multi-layered dial. You do have that retrograde date, which is a handy and dynamic take on a traditional pointer date. You can also see the springs, the pawls, and the ratchet associated with the micro rotor winding system, albeit on the dial side. I do taste spearmint when I look at this watch. There's no doubt green is the color of 2021, but as with the Breitling pistachio dial, I find this to be a particularly fetching and offbeat take on the Au Courant green tones. This is not the green that you've already seen. Now, the watch being a limited edition of 10, in 38 millimeters, is actually quite a bit more compact than it looks online, and about as rare as they come. 10-piece limited editions are real limited editions, and that's exactly what we have right here. This is a watch that will not be confused with anything else. It wears low enough to be your dress watch, and yet it's feisty enough in style with enough color, character, and charm to be a casual timepiece as well. Now, taking a look at one that came out in 2017. This model actually came out a little bit later in 2018, the titanium version of the Romain Gaultier Insight Micro Rotor. So 39.5 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. You can see just how dramatically the case is shaped as well as hand polished. It has a lovely sweep to its case flank as well as the mirrored profile of its lugs, a contrast between the satin and the polish, and that's before you even get to the dial. Now, as you can see, this is a limited edition. This is number 6 of 10. Romain Gaultier as a brand only making 50 to 60 watches a year out of the Valet de Jeu. The finishing is inspired by a good friend of Romain Gaultier, Mr. Philippe Dufour. You've probably heard of him, and you'll appreciate that this is true Valet de Jeu haute horlogerie, a timepiece with mile-wide mirrored bevels, all rendered by hand and finished to a mirrored shine with gentian wood. You can see we have many interior angles on this movement. They just keep coming. You can also see that in pocket watch fashion, inspired by the Valet de Jeu timepieces of the 19th century, we have a lovely frosted pattern across the bridges. Romain Gaultier's sort of recursive wheel design, where you have a wheel within a wheel, forms the train from the barrel, and the Platinum Micro Rotor winds an 80-hour power reserve. We have a balance of Romain Gaultier's own construction. It beats away at 8 beats per second, or 4 hertz. It is free-sprung. We can see more of those sharp interior angles here. We can also see sharp outward angles at the tips of the bridge for the balance as well as the micro rotor, and grand faux enamel dials for reading the time. It is absolutely bewitching and easy to wear. A watch under 40 millimeters that sits nicely on a wrist of any size. It is a timepiece that a connoisseur will notice, and while it is expensive and extravagant and baroque in detail, it's not something that screams "look at me" from across a room, so you can sort of have your luxury cake and eat it too without unwanted attention. Now, the kind of guy who would recognize a titanium Romain Gaultier Insight Micro Rotor, that's the kind of person you want to keep in your Rolodex, make friends, and stay in touch. This watch attracts the right kind of attention. Now, sticking with Romain Gaultier, but here the true classic. If there's one watch that embodies everything the brand has achieved, everything the brand stands for, it's going to be this one right here. This is the logical one. Launched in 2013, it won the GPHG Complication Prize that year. This model, as with all of them, 43 millimeters, you can see how detailed the case flanks are, evacuated and partly hand-polished, partly media blasted. The case is as interesting as the movement. Now, you wind the watch, there is a stop work, so it runs down and then it stops immediately rather than keep time poorly. Of course, once you start winding it by pushing the trigger at 9 o'clock, yes, you wind it by pushing the trigger at 9 o'clock, it immediately jumps into action. We have the same degree of quality we saw on the Insight, but there's more of it. We still have the grand faux enamel dials, the free sprung balance, but we have more of those sharp outward exterior angles, the points. We have more of those inward angles. We have more black polish. You can see it on almost every visible structure. We have a chain with 26 ruby jewels. I'll see if I can show them. You can see there's a little bit of ruby tone inside the chain. Those are all individual pivot jewels. And the watch is a unique fusee. So it's much like the fusee pocket watches that were originally invented in the late Renaissance period. So you have a snail cam that's pulled by a barrel, and as the barrel runs down and loses torque, it pulls a larger effective diameter of the fusee, the snail cam, so it increases the leverage and the mechanical advantage, supplying constant force to the escapement for the full 46-hour power reserve of the watch. Now, when you flip it over, you can see there is a power reserve indicator, so it is a double complication, if you will. I consider a fusee to be a complication, and then there's a power reserve indicator on the back. You can see more of those exquisite inward angles and just how broad the bevels are across these golden gilded surfaces. It is quite special. Now, the watch is going out of production after this year, so with Romain Gaultier only making a few dozen per year from 2013 to 2021, the total number in existence will be small. And if you want the Romain Gaultier and you've got a wrist to wear a 43, this example's in white gold, then this is the one to get. This is a watch that frankly rivals the best from Chronometrie Fernand Berthoud as well as Greubel Forsey. And I would even say the finishing standard inspired by Philippe Dufour is equal to Philippe Dufour. Yes, it's that good. This is one of the finest independent horology watches you can buy from a brand that's well managed by an affable fellow and an accessible fellow in Romain Gaultier himself, and they have Chanel money behind them, so they also have that fail-safe of big corporate cash, so they will always be around to supply service, parts, and knowledge. That's not universal among independents. Sticking with independence of the highest grade, Kari Voutilainen. Now, we know the fabulous Finn for the 28, the 28, and this model, launched in 2013, 2 years after the original 28, is the V8R. So a few things change. It's still a 39mm case with gorgeous welded profile lugs, the teardrops for which the Finn is famous. But we get a couple of extra features. We get a power reserve indicator, a stop work, so the watch will not keep time if it's running slow. When it's very low, it stops rather than indicate incorrect time. You also get a feature that's not present on the original, which is hacking or stop seconds. The watch has a lovely dial Voutilainen, making cases and dials in-house. This is a 25-piece limited edition, and you can see the quality of the hands, which are polished and fired and then assembled from pieces to create the three-dimensional multicolored profile that you see here. A lovely gloss black dial base with applique tri-Arabic numerals as well as golden indices. Flip it over and you can see the caliber 28 or the V8R version of it. It has an enormous black polished balance bridge, a huge overcoil profile hairspring, a balance of truly enormous proportions. Then if you look carefully, you can actually see there are two blued escape wheels. This is a double direct impulse escapement inspired by the Breguet natural escapement. It improves power reserve, it reduces friction, and it improves timekeeping. Now, of course, we have frosted bridges, we have black polished recesses on the wheels visible on the top of the barrel bridge, we have mile-wide anglage, including interior angles, and as you can see, the timepiece is open, airy, and easy to appreciate as you can view the components diagonally looking down and into it. It's also a pleasure to wind. It has one of the finest detents you'll ever feel. The click is a little piece of heaven. It's a pleasure to engage with this watch and wind it on a daily basis. Now you can see this was before Voutilainen started making his own cases because it has a stamp of a guild that made this case. The craftsmanship is the same. This is just a discontinued series as these days Voutilainen and Catin, Voutilainen's in-house case maker, makes the case. It's a little bit like an Eleanor era FP Journe from before FP made every part. That's exactly what this is for Kari Voutilainen. A lovely piece that wears well. It's compact enough, though it looks bigger. It is just a 39mm watch, and it's nice and discreet. Rose gold with the warmth that entails and the power of a black dial in a red gold case really revs my engine. This is an emotional watch that radiates heat. Now, taking a quick look at a watch from a group brand that acts a little bit like an independent. Well, let's hold off. Let's take a look at our actual independents for a moment. Sticking with Greubel Forsey, this is as good as it gets. If you want the latest from the folks in La Chaux de Fonds, they only make 100 to 120 watches a year, and that's about how many employees they have, which is pretty much an unheard of ratio of employees to watches made. And the reason is because of the finishing. It just takes that much time and that many specialists. This is the Balancier Contemporain. It is a watch 39.6 millimeters in red gold. It is the Eau Rouge model. And because of that, it has a lovely red gold sheath in a reasonable size at under 40 millimeters and just over 12 millimeters thick. It has a lovely box section sapphire, and you can see just how rounded and concave the lug profiles are. Greubel Forsey watches are known for their movements, but their cases are also beautiful and artisanal. Now on the dial of the watch, you can see there are two barrels stacked up, 72-hour power reserve, manual wind. This watch too is a pleasure to wind. You can see everything for which Greubel is famous. An enormous recessed white gold bolt proprietary free-sprung balance for durability, 6-position adjusted with a handmade overcoil hairspring. You can see it sits on top of a mirrored base, so you can see the underside of the assembly. You can also see that the balance bridge is black polished continuously with 4 sharp interior angles where bevels meet. It is mirror beveled on its edge, and you can see that well from this angle. The bridges, which are made of maillot, or a nickel copper zinc alloy, they have been silvered, and as you can see, they have been grained, probably with a wire brush. The two most popular ways to do this, acid and a wire brush. I'm thinking wire brushes were used here because they're a little bit neater, a little bit more contemporary, and they provide a lovely ripple of texture across these surfaces. The hands are made of steel and fired to achieve that cobalt blue, and as you can see, there's a wonderful depth to this movement with mirrored anglage, not just on the edge of the balance bridge, but on the edge of every bridge. You can see the bridge adjacent to the power reserve has been mirrored on its side, and that continues all the way across the break that separates the two halves of the bifurcated dial. And then these screws, black polished on their top, chamfered on their slots and circumference, they are the proverbial 100 Swiss franc screws. And we have in text the philosophy of Robert Greubel and Stephen Forsey. Basically, make things beautifully with high sophistication and traditional methods. Throwing it on the wrist, it looks nothing like other Greubel Forsey watches. Those are famed for their excess, including excess of size, whereas this watch is discreet, compact, and in good taste. It's a unisex option, and I don't think I've ever said that of a Greubel Forsey, but a lady's wrist could wear this. It's beautifully compact for those who favor less ambitious independence, along the lines of perhaps an F. Pigeon, something a little bit more common, more compact. Well, this watch is fully competitive with those, albeit with a level of finish that far exceeds them. Now, if you want to talk about a group brand, and I hinted at it earlier, but I decided I'd go through my indies first, a group brand that behaves and acts as an independent, a Lange und Söhne, a historic name dating back to 1845. The current version of the company dates back to 1990, when it was reincorporated by family scion Walter Lange, and he decided to make watches again under the family name after the fall of communism. So in 1994, they launched their first watches in a press conference at Dresden Castle, and the model you see right here came out in 2014 in red gold. It's the 1815 Tourbillon, 39.5 millimeters. You can see it's a lovely and compact case that's easy to wear. The dial is a precious metal disc of hallmarked sterling silver that has this silver white coloration. And as you can see, a tourbillon that features free-sprung architecture and overcoil hairspring. It is a 1-minute tourbillon, so it also acts as the seconds display. And something you rarely see, hacking seconds, a tourbillon that not only has stop seconds but 0 reset, so you can set this tourbillon watch, and by the way, how much do you love that hacking lever, but you can set this tourbillon watch to the second against a reference time. Flip it all over, we have caliber L102.1. Yes, it's a hacking second tourbillon, but perhaps the most extraordinary feature is the one you can barely see. While the red rubies are synthetic, the brilliant cut diamond capstone of the tourbillon, that is real. You can see that the balance, well, I'm going to not call it the balance cock because it's a full bridge underneath the tourbillon, but it has been freehand engraved with a lovely banknote style scrolling. We have German silver, nickel copper zinc, with the copper giving it that golden hue. We have jewels set in chaton, fixed by blued screws. And note, we have both polished screws on this movement and fired blued screws. It has both. The locating pegs of the movement have been black polished on their top. We have glasuta stripes, and as you can see, all of the bevels are mirrored. They are not finished mechanically. Engine turning here, you can see it in 1, 2, 3 different sizes. And the tourbillon carriage itself has a black polished bridge, and it's a filigree or wire style tourbillon cage that is black polished around its tops. So the finishing here is exhaustive. It has a manual wind 3-day power reserve, which in a sub 40mm watch with a tourbillon is quite impressive. The refinement runneth over. This watch is extraordinary, and it's one of the reasons why I think longa dress complications represent enormous untapped value in the current marketplace. Now, I talked about somewhat more conventional and mainstream independents, and I think H. Moser & C. is just about joining those ranks. These are remarkably reliable, robust, everyday wearable, independent brand watches from a company that only makes about 1,500 watches a year out of Schaffhausen, Switzerland, which is to say, along with F.P. Journe, I consider H. Moser & C. to be an indie for those who don't want to deal with the histrionics of materials, mechanics, and artiste watchmakers. Like the Journes, Mosers of current construction just work. And this is an extraordinary example. This is the Endeavour Perpetual Moon concept aventurine, an aventurine glass dial that is basically a lovely dark blue translucent enamel, vitreous enamel, with elements of metallic flake added to create the image of an infinite cosmos behind the perpetual moon. Now, this perpetual moon phase is accurate to over 1,000 years, which means for about 1 millennium, you don't have to adjust it. The system was designed for Moser by Andreas Strehler, AHCI luminary, and one of the great masters of hidden complication. So it looks simple, but it is very complex under the dial. So you basically never need to adjust the moon, hence it is a perpetual moon. Now, I do have hacking or stop seconds, and if you look carefully, you can see there's a little index that moves in 24-hour cycles. It's a separate stub hand that lets you know whether it's day or night, so you can set the moon phase accordingly. There's a little pusher on the side that lets you set the moon phase. 42 millimeters in red gold. You can see this is a limited edition of 50 pieces. The case flank is machined to create this depth and then hand finished to create the mirror polish and then the sharp break from the satin finish. The bezel is a lovely fluid thing, concave all the way around, but drawn wider at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So it's a little bit asymmetrical, looking like molten metal drawn out and flash frozen. HMC 801, the movement's rated for 7 days power reserve, but it'll run for almost 9. That is German-Swiss, under-promising and over-delivering. It is a multi-complication. It has the AM/PM indicator, it has the perpetual moon phase, and it has a power reserve. 2 mainspring barrels. It beats away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. Durable with a free sprung balance and a full balance bridge. It also includes a 14-karat gold escapement that can make do with minimal lubrication, increasing power reserve and reducing friction. You can also see that there is an overcoil hairspring made by hand, and all of the impressive stuff, the assortment, it's made by Moser through its precision engineering subsidiary, so they make the balance, the hairspring, the escape wheel, and the anchor, which is very, very impressive for a company that only makes 1,500 watches per year total. There's a lovely double-crested Côte de Genève, and if you look carefully, you can see that the crystal on the case back has a camber to trace the arc of your wrist. So a truly beautiful, mechanically robust watch from a brand with a celebrity CEO who is super accessible and active on social media, including my social media. Edouard Milan, you're probably going to meet him at some point, online or off, if you own a Moser watch. And this is a great example of what they do, as this is their concept dial. It has no branding. It has no marks, no indices, not even a statement of national origin, since Moser insists its watches are over 95% Swiss-made. It doesn't need to boast. And yet you know who made this watch because of the design. It's that distinctive. And that is distinctive of Moser, being both proud and modest simultaneously. A spectacular watch that needs no branding. Now, if you want something truly special that you don't find every day, made from 2002 to 2006 in the form you see here, this is the Omega Deville Central Tourbillon. The original model, the Central Tourbillon, was launched in 1994, and these are watches made in dozens, not hundreds per year. 38.7 millimeters in platinum. You can see it has a Baroque case profile. These look somewhat similar to those featured on 1950s and 40s Omegas like the 2637. And you can see it is a really spectacular case design that's remarkable remarkably interesting from any angle. It is also an unconventional watch. It has a crown that's used for winding, and then you wind it by turning counterclockwise, and then it has a caseback setting crown that you pull out and use to actually set the watch. Let me demonstrate how this works. So you pull out the little crown, and then you adjust it from the case back, and there is actually a set of pinions underneath this broad bezel, and they drive these sapphire discs that bear the wheels telling time. The discs have hands that appear to float over the dial, and the hour and minute hands orbit the central tourbillon. The central tourbillon beats away at 21.6, and it features a handmade blued Breguet overcoil hairspring. It is a flying tourbillon with no upper bridge. The watch is automatic. You can see the image of Chronos on the reverse side. This caliber 2600B was the first of the central tourbillon movements to be chronometer certified. It's an automatic winder with 48 joules and a 45-hour power reserve. You can see it features a matching platinum deploying clasp, and it is not too big. A timepiece designed with substantial input from the great master watchmaker Maurice Grimm. This is one of the few Rolex, Omega, or Breitling watches that will be entirely handcrafted, hand-finished, and hand-adjusted, and the internal finish within the case is spectacular, as is the finish to the tourbillon carriage that you can see. You can also see that there's a lovely manually engraved sunburst platform underneath the beating balance. An absolutely spectacular watch, and of course this brand will be around forever to service your tourbillon. This is a tourbillon with no nonsense. Okay, maybe a little bit. A watch wouldn't be fun if it weren't slightly nonsensical, but this is a no-worry tourbillon. If you like vintage style, but you don't want to put up with the snakes in the vintage space, Franken watches, counterfeits, bad condition, excessive prices, well, frankly, I think you can't do any better than this reference 5000 from Vacheron Constantin. The original modern version of the Corne de Vache launched in 2015. Slowly afterwards, we received rose gold, and then in 2018, Hodinkee had a steel model. For 2019, a standard production steel model joined the catalog. That is what this watch is. Now, as you can see, it is nicely sized at about 38.5 millimeters. It's a borderline 39, and it's all stainless steel, 11.1 millimeters thick. It has the famed Corne de Vache lugs that you will trace to the historic Vacheron reference 6087. The watch has a lovely dial with several different silver tones, sunken registers, white gold Roman numerals, and stick indices, and you can see the hands themselves are manually polished with a vaulted rounded top, something you expect from handmade hands from small manufacturers. The timepiece, of course, powered by Vacheron caliber 1142, which is based on the Lemania 2310, which under a different sky and a different name went to the moon as Omega caliber 321. Here finished a high horology standard with Geneva hallmark on both movement and case, as both movement and case meet the new Geneva hallmark whole watch standard. Free sprung, 5-position adjusted, manual wind, 48-hour power reserve, 21.6 beat rate. It has a handmade Breguet overcoil hairspring, and you can see the column wheel features a little polished Maltese cross motif inside. Lateral clutch, very crisp to operate. It is an absolute pleasure to operate these pump pushers. Now throw the watch on the wrist and you can see it cuts a striking figure, but not a big one. Suitable for wrists as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. It's not as small as the 35 millimeter original, but it is a contemporary take on a timeless style from the Vacheron Historique collection, which since the early 1990s, way before retro watches were cool, Historique has been reviving the immortals from the Vacheron catalog. I don't really call them revivals so much as evergreen. Much like Cartier's best designs, they never really go out of style and they live on forever, and that's exactly what you have here with the Corne de Vache. From Patek Philippe, launched in 2019, 41 millimeters in white gold, the successor to the 5170. This is the 5172G. You can already see it features stop seconds, so you can stop complaining about the lack of hacking. The newer Patek movements are phasing that in. A lot to love about this watch. 41 millimeters, instead of launching first a rather wan, over-refined yellow gold, stick index, silver dial model, the way Patek launched the 5170, basically with the most conservative style possible. Patek gave us the version we wanted right out of the gate with the 5172. So 41 millimeters in white gold, it borrows the case liberally from the 5320 perpetual calendar. You can see the lugs are pulled from the historic reference 2405, and then we have a lot on the dial that references the 5320. You can see right here we have vertically arrayed white gold Arabic numerals, and then those syringe style hands. We have a granular blue matte base from the Calatrava Pilot, so if you're familiar with that model, that's where the dial color comes from. White on blueprint, lovely contrast, sunken registers, somewhat sunken below the cannon pinion. You can see these things are not in line. That's one of the characteristics of the manufacturer caliber 29-535 Petit Second. You can really see that it's a gorgeous broad movement that fills the case back. 65-hour power reserve, 6-position adjustment, Gyromax style free sprung, handmade overcoil hairspring, a black polished capped column wheel with a lateral clutch that features pivot jewels in gold and chaton in a nod to the past. There is a ratchet and pawl system that is there as the instantaneous minute jumper, and again, all of this manual wind 65-hour power reserve, gorgeously hand finished and a pleasure to operate. The timepiece wears substantial on the wrist, full size but not oversized. It comes with a matching white gold folding clasp. It's a good looking watch. Sporty and elegant alternately. It could be your dress watch, it could be your casual watch. You could absolutely wear this with short sleeves, and you could do so on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. It's flat, and you can also see that, like the 5320, it channels vintage imagery in its use of a box section or bubble-like sapphire. A really good looking watch on both sides and externally. It is in many regards more interesting than the 5170, both on the dial and externally. The 5170 had a relatively plain, and one might even say anodyne case. This one's exciting, right down to the turbine profiles of the pointed pump pushers. There's something to love from almost every angle. And in an unexpected twist, this is a remarkably well-loomed Patek Philippe dress chronograph. That said, I was always going to finish with this watch. Launched in 2019 in 88 pieces, this, from the Wristmold series, is the Konstantin Chaikin Green Halloween Pumpkin Limited Edition, a watch with a spectacular sunburst metallic green dial, and yes, a 61-piece proprietary time-telling module by Konstantin Chaikin of Moscow. You could see that the time-telling functions are performed by the googly eyes, which is a technical horological term born in the Vallée du Joux, and I will demonstrate right here. It is now 12:15. That's how it works. 61 pieces and 8 jewels. He builds that on top of an ETA 2824 tractor automatic, so it is super robust. 42 millimeters by 13.7 millimeters thick. It has a lovely burnished or aged bronze and a steel caseback with the image of a witch flying across the moon with the bats flying chase. Flip it over and you can see this Russian-built watch includes a charming face-style dial that is not the first of his Halloween tributes, but it is my favorite in a very 2021 green. Now, if you look, you can see there is a radially arrayed spelling of Halloween in English using the Latin alphabet around the periphery of the bezel, and then there's a moon phase down at 6 o'clock, which is adjusted using a pusher on the case flank. The watch isn't as big as it looks online. All of these, from the original 2017 Steel Joker watch, are about 3 millimeters smaller than you would guess. I would have guessed about a 45. In fact, it's a 42, and it wears beautifully. Comfortable, rock solid, reasonably priced, and from an AHCI master. Konstantin Chaikin was the first ever Russian AHCI member, a club that includes cool kids like Philippe Dufour, Kari Voutilainen, F.P. Journe, and Marco Lang. This is about as much fun as you can have in 42 millimeters on your wrist. So, if you like what you see, email me directly, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Time out, Tim out. Thanks for logging on.